Kendrick Lamar, right? Alright. Fall Out Boy, eh. Kings of Leon, ew. The Strokes, Prodigy, Foo Fighters, hello and welcome back to Rock Cycle. We are just coming into festival season now in the UK, and this is a very exciting time. So we're going to be having a lot of festival focused content and that style of thing on the channel over the next few coming weeks and months. So if you're interested in that thing, if you're new, if you want to click subscribe to stay up to date and hear all of that, etc., it would mean a lot to me. As we always say, the more the merrier. Now, today we are going to be looking at Leeds and Reading Festival and how it has got worse over the past few years, etc., which a lot of people are saying you can't log on to a Leeds and Reading post without all the comments saying, ooh, when's the real lineup coming out, etc., etc. There's been a lot of criticism about it, and we're going to be looking at that in this video. We're going to be breaking it down into two halves. First off saying why it's kind of wrong, and second half saying why it's kind of right. So we're going to try to look at it from both sides. Now I think this all came to a peak in 2018's lineup. There's really a perfect storm of lots of problems going on there, with Kendrick Lamar supposedly being the most he ever spent on an act, so he had no budget to spend on the rest of the lineup. Foo Fighters supposedly cancelling last minute, so he had to get a last minute headliner being Kings of Leon. And they also tried to diversify the festival, which was very unsuccessful from fans' reactions, it seems to be. So now let's just get into why things aren't as bad as they seem. Now I think this is, first of all, I'm just going to say the first point, which is also the weakest point, so I don't know why I'm making this first point in the video, but hey ho, that is basically nostalgia. There's just something about it. People just like the acts from olden days, like people like the music they grew up with, etc. It's something that everyone will say and will always be true. I mean, I'm only 20 and I already think the music 10 years ago when I grew up was better. So it's pretty mad. Just wait till you listen to my dad. Oh, Cameron, the music in the 70s was so much better than the trash today. So yeah, this is something that's been said at the moment. It was said 10 years ago and was said before then. It's been something that's been said over hundreds and hundreds of years, basically. I don't know if that's entirely true, so please don't sue me. But people have always said and always will say older music is better. It's just something about the music you grew up with. There's no real way I can describe it. There's something that you just prefer about it. It's because what you knew is what you're comfortable with. So people are always going to be against the new music just on that principle, really. So yeah, that is partly why the new lineups aren't as good in some people's eyes as they were before. Now I think the second main point on why the old lineups do look better is how bands have naturally grown. I mean, this is quite an extreme example, but let's go back to 1999. Look at that lineup. You have Blink 182, Coldplay and Muse on the bottom stage of all fucking places they could be. If those three came back this year, they would be arguably the strongest set of headliners the festival has ever had. Because bands, of course, naturally become bigger and bigger and bigger as they release more music and they grow, etc. So that makes the old lineups look so much better. We can look and see bands like Panic at the Disco were on in the middle of the afternoon. And you're sort of like, bloody hell, they're a headliner style band now. They're on so early down, it makes the whole thing look so good. You don't realise is when you were there at the time, yeah, these bands weren't as relevant. Like, people didn't care that Coldplay was on at the middle of the day before. And yeah, now if Coldplay were there at the festival today, they would get a crowd of like 50,000 easily. You may think that I used 1999 as an extreme example, but let's just go back 5 years and look at the lineup in 2014. Okay, there you had, who weren't even headline, you had Imagine Dragons, The 1975, Wolf Alice, Catfish and the Bottomless, Slaves, Don Broco, Architects, A Day to Remember, and that's just some of my personal favourites. All of these bands, if they came back this year, and some of them are coming back this year, I think would all be either headliners or in the top 2 or 3 acts, probably on the bill poster to show off. Like, these bands have all massively grown from that time. They're so much bigger now, so when you look back at that lineup, you're sort of like, oh yeah, that was so great. But what you don't really realise is back then, I didn't, and probably you didn't too, care about those bands who were on. So yeah, it makes that old poster look a lot better than it was at the time, relatively. And I can guarantee you we will say the same thing about 2019. I predict that in 10 years time, well, I promise you, in 10 years time, one of the acts who's at the festival this year who aren't on the main stage and they aren't headlining any of the other stages will be headlining the festival. So if you're currently in 2029 when you're watching this video, write a comment down below and let me know if I was right or wrong. So now we're going to be looking at why it is true and why the festival has got worse. And I think the number one factor of this, of course, is money, because that is the most important thing always. Bands these days now charge a lot more than what they used to, so it's costing the festival a lot more to hire them. And some people say that's greedy, and some people say it's justifiable. I mean, if people will pay £500 to see James Charles, who knows what people will pay to see Foo Fighters. Now, yes, partly this is inflation when you go back and look at old bands and see that Pink Floyd were charging £400 or whatever for a show. So yeah, that money is worth a lot more these days. But yes, bands did generally charge less, even if you adjust for inflation. I think especially at festivals, because this is all supposedly, I've heard a few people say it, but I can't find any definite sources on this. But bands used to charge a lot less to play at a festival and usually even perform for free, like fairly often. Because back in the days before the internet and things, etc., you didn't have a lot of opportunities for publicity besides like magazines and radio, things like that. So being on a festival poster, having your name up there was a great advertisement. It got you loads of exposure and lots of new attention. And yeah, you still do get that now, but with things like the internet and social media, like bands can get a lot more exposure through ways like that, which cost them a lot less money and, well, a lot less effort. So bands can get away with charging a lot more because they don't need the free publicity. I also think it has become a lot harder to find out who is a big act these days. It's not quite as simple as who gets played on the radio a lot, who has the most physical album sales, because those things are a lot less relevant now than they used to be. People are listening to music in all sorts of new ways. People are listening on Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, etc., Google Music even. And there's also like artists' presence on things like Instagram and Twitter, like how big they are on there comes into it. So yeah, there's a lot of new factors going into what makes a big artist compared to simply a few years ago, well, 20 years ago, just going, oh yeah, this guy's got 2 #1 albums, let's get him. So yeah, there's a lot more going on. And it's a lot harder to understand that. Like Psy with Gangnam Style got billions and billions of views on YouTube. So he was arguably the biggest musician at the time. But if he headlined Leeds Fest, like, I don't know what I would do. And now we're getting on to what is arguably the biggest problem with the festival right now, which is what a lot of people seem to believe, is their attempt to diversify the festival and why that has tragically failed. Because the festival seems to believe, like a lot of people, that rock music is dying. Now personally I don't believe that's true. I think the genre is certainly on the decline, but I don't think it's a dead genre at all, and I think I have a whole video on that which will hopefully appear around here if I remember to add it in on YouTube, but who knows if I will or not. So while yes, rock music is declining, there still is quite a considerable fan base for it. You got things like Download Festival that's doing completely fine despite being hard rock and metal, which are much more obscure genres compared to this traditional rock. And you've also got a rise of indie festivals over the past few years, such as Why Not and Truck. They've really grown recently, and quite a few others have. So yes, rock music is on the decline, but I think there's still enough fans out there, there's still enough people into it to justify a rock festival. Reading and Leeds Festival starts to have a problem when they try to have too many different genres and too many styles on. Like, maybe they'll have half a good indie bands on, but an indie fan will look at the festival and be like, yeah, I can go there and see half a dozen good indie bands, or I can go to Truck Festival and see a whole 3 days lineup of good indie bands. They'll have 5 or 6 good grime, hip-hop rappers on. A rap fan will come along, see that, be like, yeah, that's pretty good, or go to Wireless and see a full festival dedicated to that genre I like, etc, etc, for every genre. Now yes, people do like a variety, myself included, and they like to see lots of different genres and they enjoy listening to them, but there's still a lot of people who predominantly do have their favourites, myself included, which I'm sure you know is rock music. I do prefer going to rock festivals, even if I do listen to all sorts of different other genres as well. They just end up being spread too thin when they try to please everyone. They've only got so much money, they've only got so many different slots for artists, they've only got so much budget. They can't compete with specialised festivals that have a dedicated lineup just for one style of music. They just end up spreading themselves far too thin in their attempt to please everyone and end up pleasing no one. Because at the end of the day, I don't think the festival ever will be able to please everyone. I don't think any festival ever could. The only one that I can really think that comes close is Glastonbury. But Leeds Fest is not on Glastonbury's level, despite being the largest festival in the UK by attendance now after V-Fest has officially been cancelled. But Glastonbury has an insane budget. It can offer massive exposure and can offer a lot of prestige to people who perform there, which Reading and Leeds Festival just does not. Like, Glastonbury is such a unique festival, you can't really compare it to other ones, and I think Reading and Leeds is trying to become that, but I don't really think they're anywhere close to that yet. I think they're much better to choose one area, or one or two. They can have a few different genres and specialise in that area and become very good at them, and then the fans who love that music will go there and love it, rather than trying to get loads of people to come but just to have everyone only enjoy a few bits of it. No one really loved the whole thing, because it just becomes a bit of a weird mishmash of different styles and people and etc. Like last year's festival, you had like Panic at the Disco and Kendrick Lamar on back to back. You could tell each crowd were mostly there just because they were there for the other act and they weren't enjoying all of the set, etc. So it really does make the festival a lot less fun. Now I do think, yes, there's nothing wrong with variety, but there's some styles of variety that complement each other a lot better than other styles of variety. Like, you wouldn't put an orchestra on followed by Stormzy. Like, that just wouldn't make any sense. You'd have two things like an indie rock band and a hard rock band. Like, yeah, they're two arguably completely different genres, but they have a bit of a nice complement to each other. So I think that's more or less summarised the points I wanted to make about this and whether Leeds and Reading Festival have got worse. Personally, I do think they have got a bit worse, but I think this year's 2019's lineup is pretty decent, and I think they're starting to turn it around now. They've heard the criticism, they've heard the complaints, and they've acted on it a lot better. So let me know if you agree or disagree, etc. down below. And if you want to like, comment, subscribe, I would personally love that very much. So I shall see you in the next video.